Shalom, this is Avram Fried. Stay tuned. Taped with Rabbi Doug is next.
We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug. We're gonna see Rabbi Doug on your TV tonight. But Daddy, I want to watch Monday Night Football.
Forget about Monday Night Football. There's no other thing we're going to watch on Monday but Rabbi Doug.
Yeah, Rabbi Doug on TV tonight. We're going to see Rabbi Doug. Oh, everybody talk about Doug.
Shalom and welcome to Taped with Rabbi Doug. Glad you could be with us today. My guest today is Rabbi Moshe Miller. Shalom Aleichem, Baruch haba. Thank you for coming. Rabbi Miller is an author and a scholar and an expert in Kabbalah. And today in the news, you read about Kabbalah all the time. You read about movie stars, certainly many not Jewish. You read about athletes. You read about people in the news and even news people themselves who want to study Kabbalah and learn about it and almost think like they're able to use the Kabbalah to their benefit in some way without being Jewish, without being religious. And Kabbalah is really a very spiritual, holy thing. And Rabbi Miller, you being the expert that you are in Kabbalah and an author of so many books on Kabbalah and translator of so many other famous works in Kabbalah, can you first of all, just as an opening, tell our viewers what Kabbalah is and what brings it to such heights of holiness that Jewish tradition is that we don't study it until we're well learned and 45 years old and so on, aged?
Mm-hmm. Kabbalah is one of the four aspects of Torah interpretation, called the Paradise of Torah, the simple, straightforward explanation of Torah, which is called Pshat. Then there's Remez, which hints at various things, which includes Gematria, for instance, numerology. And then there's Drush, usually homiletical explanations, sermons. The sermons you hear from your rabbi are generally Drush. And then Sod, which is the secret explanation of Torah, the dimension which is really passed down from one teacher to students, and that's how we have it today. It was passed down as part of the oral tradition. So it is very much part of the Torah tradition, and in addition to that, there are some special, as you mentioned, there are some special requirements for a person to be able to really learn it, understand it, and work with it.
Now here, I'm over 45 years old, barely, but I'm over 45 years old, and Kabbalah still seems so above when I sit down and somebody's teaching Kabbalah, above my realm of understanding. I understand certain things, but there seems to be something beyond what I myself find in my own comfort zone of study. What brings someone to a comfort zone of study where they really can delve into Kabbalah and begin to understand it?
Well, I think what brings a person to study Kabbalah is, as in my case, was many, many questions that are not answered otherwise. If you don't look at the esoteric dimension of things, it's very difficult to understand certain aspects of the Torah, and so automatically you sort of gravitate towards that. The problem with understanding it is you don't have a good teacher.
There we go. Now, we've known each other for a number of years. You came to Chicago 5 or 6 years ago, and
right.
We see each other on a semi-regular basis, and it was really my dear friend Rabbi Yisrael Bernath who informed me of the numerous things that you've authored. One of the most popular and famous that you have is the book on the Zohar, selections translated and annotated by Moshe Miller. And you, Rabbi Moshe Miller, wrote about the Zohar. Tell us what the Zohar is. I know many people don't know. It's certainly something in the Kabbalistic realm. And tell us the origin of Zohar and why you wrote a book about it.
The Zohar is probably the primary Kabbalistic work, which was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, a second century sage.
And was this written during his 13 years in the cave?
Partially. The truth is that it wasn't only written by him, it was written by him and his whole group of students, and really through several generations. Just like the Gemara, the Talmud was written not just by one person, but it was written by a whole series of of students and teachers that wrote down the teachings. The bulk of the Zohar, the main primary teachings, are from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. But then there's additions that come in later from his students, and so on and so forth.
Let me tell people who Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai was, by the way.
Yeah.
Not only was he a great scholar who was hiding from the Romans because it was against the law to teach Judaism, to teach Torah at that time, and he hid in a cave with his son for 13 years, I believe, according to tradition. Yeah. And he is buried in the city of Meron in Israel, and he died on Lag BaOmer. He was born on Lag BaOmer as well. I believe he died on his birthday. Am I correct about that?
That we don't know. We're not sure when.
Some
he was
people
born.
have said that. And on Lag BaOmer, there are great traditions of coming to the city of Meron, to his graveside. Haircuts take place for children who boys who haven't had a haircut until their third birthday, often on Lag BaOmer, and great bonfires throughout Israel in his memory. Was his power, and the reason I ask this because we hear stories about his time in the cave. Did he really have some kind of telekinetic power that he was able to use with Kabbalah, where he was able to maybe start fires with his mind or things like that? There are stories of such
right.
things.
The stories are told, in fact, in the Talmud, and the Gemara mentions such stories in the Midrashim as well, Midrashic literature. Yes, he was not the only one. There were many people during his time who had these powers, but he was regarded as certainly the foremost proponent of Kabbalistic teachings in that time. And a lot of the Kabbalistic tradition comes down really from his from what he taught and what he wrote down.
And these what we call powers, which I hate that word, but these abilities were mind over matter, using spiritual Kabbalistic learning and things that he learned, that he was able to learn how to do these things. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, there are prayers and meditations. There's really two aspects of Kabbalah. One is what's called Kabbalah Iyunit, which is more the theoretical side of things, which describes the structure of the inner structure of the universe, the origin of the universe, the inner structure of the soul, the inner structure of the human personality, and so on and so forth. That's the theoretical aspect. And then there's the more practical side of things, which I think is what you're talking about. There's meditations, there's prayers, there's uses of holy names and things like that. He was master in both areas, and that's why he's really so famous. Since his time, there have not been so many of the sages who have been expert in both areas.
Tell me about the Golem of Prague. Also a Kabbalistic, mythical creature who some say did exist, some say didn't exist. What is the origin of the story of the Golem of Prague? I guess, I don't know, it would sort of be like a Bigfoot in today's world, but created through Kabbalistic means in some way. Can you tell me a little bit of the origin of the stories of the Golem?
Yeah, the Golem itself, we're not 100% sure of exactly what the tradition is. There are quite a few historical pieces of evidence that show that it really did exist. However, what we do know for sure is that the sages speak quite openly and freely about it, even in the Gemara. Some of the sages of the Talmud used to, in fact, use Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Formations, which is what the Maharal of Prague is said to have used to create the Golem. They used it in order to create various beings, and it's not a new subject that all of a sudden sprang up with the Maharal of Prague. It's a well-known idea even in those times. Now, if we have a look in historically, for a few hundred years already, there's been a statue of the Maharal with the story of the Golem of Prague. So I imagine that most of the although there may have been some legends that grew up around it as well, the story itself has a ring of truth about it. And in fact, it's very possible that this can be done. There was a more recent event, the Guru, the Gaon of Vilna, the famous Gaon of Vilna, himself began to create the Golem, and he stopped because he felt that he was too young at the time. He was under 20 at the time, so he felt that he shouldn't do it at that time. But these things have been done, before, and I assume they'll be done again. But
we don't know when. Let me go back to the big question, because our viewers who are watching who have any knowledge of Kabbalah, going back to my opening statement, famous names, Madonna, Demi Moore, Britney Spears. You see them with their red threads around their wrists in the news. You see them on TV. You see them. You see these rabbis in Los Angeles being interviewed because they're their teachers. Is something forbidden going on within this, and is it real what they're learning and what they're being taught?
You know, I really don't know what they're being taught. Frankly, I haven't delved into the teachings of Philip Berg, who's their mentor and teacher. As far as the red string is concerned, it's very doubtful that there's any Jewish tradition from this. It probably is an Islamic tradition somewhere along the way, or even a pagan tradition. There's no real source for it anywhere. Certainly not in Kabbalah. There isn't any source for it. And I imagine that most of what they're learning is just so they can get some, spiritual thrills and highs. It could be that some of them are learning, some real stuff, but it's very unlikely. And one of the reasons that it's so unlikely that they're learning anything real is because it's impossible to really get any great understanding of anything unless you're sort of part of the tradition. In other words, it's not just a magic spell that you cast and suddenly things start to work, things start to happen. You have to really live it you have to be it in order for it to really happen.
And that would include a Torah life, I would presume.
Yeah, it would include a Torah life, yeah.
I do want to talk about all the things you're doing, and I know there's so much. Another book, Mishnas Chabad, is another book that you have authored, and this is a book on philosophy, isn't it? And how does this connect? This is Lubavitch Chabad Philosophy connected to Kabbalah. And can you tell me where does Lubavitch Chabad itself, as a movement, from the Alter Rebbe, the original Chabad rabbi, Lubavitch rabbi, where does he come into the original traditions of Kabbalah, that there's philosophy connected between Chabad and Kabbalah itself?
Yeah, there are really three streams of Kabbalah. The original Kabbalah, which was revealed by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, has in fact in it three streams, but the unpacking, so to speak, of these three streams took quite a long time. There were three eras of Kabbalah. The first era was really summed up and codified really by the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. I have a copy of one of his books over here called The Palm Tree of Dvorah in English, the Toma Dvorah, which is a Kabbalistic tract that deals with the 13 attributes of mercy. He was the one that really summed up the early Kabbalistic tradition.
Let me just go back and explain to our viewers, especially our Jewish viewers who attend high holiday services at least, the 13 attributes from the book of Exodus, from Parshas Ki Tisa, are Hashem Kel Racham V'Chanun Erech Hapayim V'Av Chesed V'Emes Notzer Chesed Lalafim Notzei Yavam V'Fesha V'Chatav V'Nakeh, and they sing it in the synagogue. Na 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 na. So people are very familiar with these words, but I don't think they know what the 13 attributes are. And if you would just explain within what you're saying right now how they connect, I think that would be important for people who are saying these words at least on the high holidays, if not those of us who daven on a regular basis and use them holiday time. What is the importance of them?
Right. Actually, just to correct something, what Rabbi Moshe Cordovero wrote about was not the 13 attributes of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is in the Torah. He wrote about the 13 attributes of mercy from Micha, one of the prophets.
From Micah, Micha.
Yeah. So what does it really do? What's the difference between them? It's explained in various Kabbalistic works that one has to do with life in the body, and the other one has to do with the life of the soul. And that's really the one that Rabbi Moshe Cordovero wrote about, the attributes from Micha, which what do they have to do with? They have to do with very, very elevated, I suppose you could call them subconscious themes or subconscious ideas which are buried within the soul and really reflect the 13 attributes of mercy of Moses, of Moshe Rabbeinu, which we find in the Torah. One reflects the other, but it gives a person the ability to raise himself up to a higher level of spiritual consciousness. And that's basically what these ideas are, these 13 attributes of mercy.
You yourself, you were born in South Africa. You've lived in England. You lived in Israel for so many years. I know you were in New Jersey before you came to Chicago. You've been all over the world. Have you been teaching Kabbalah for a very long time?
I have been teaching for over 20 years. Yeah.
Over 20 years. Over 20 years. Amazing.
I'm not that old, but
No. But it's amazing because it's such a high level of learning and teaching. What are you doing in Kabbalah today? I know you told me about the museum. If you tell our viewers about that, I think that's a big thing. And what's up in Kabbalah today with Rabbi Moshe Miller and with the Chicago community as well?
one of the teachings of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the Zohar is that he said that there'll come a certain time when it'll be time really to start teaching and spreading out his teachings to even to ordinary individuals who perhaps are not quite ready for a very lofty version of them, a very lofty form of them, but nevertheless can understand on their level. So that's what I try to do, and there's many others as well. We try to give people an understanding of the depth of Torah through the lens of Kabbalah, you could say. In other words, to see that there's a much deeper dimension to the Torah teachings, and what seem to be ostensibly stories of the Torah really have much greater depth. I'll give you an example. The story of Jacob, Yaakov, Avinu, the patriarch, when he was in the middle of having his argument with Laban, with Lavan. So he was given a certain amount of sheep. He needed to make himself a living like everyone, like all of us do. And he had these sheep that he wanted to cause them to
be spotted and
speckled and spangled and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So what did he do? He took sticks and he peeled these sticks and he put them in the drinking troughs where the sheep were going to drink. So it's explained in Kabbalah, in the Zohar, that what he was really doing was a spiritual activity. Even though he was using physical things, he was doing a physical, spiritual activity which is somewhat the equivalent of putting on tefillin for us. When we put on tefillin, that was what he was doing. How was he doing it? Not by peeling the sticks, but by using the sticks as a means of concentration and meditation in order to achieve certain spiritual activities, let's say. And things came out the way he wanted them to come out. Now, just seeing that, hearing the story that he put these sticks in the drinking troughs, it's interesting, but we don't know what it's all about. There it's explained, in Kabbalah it's explained in quite a lot of depth. There's many other things like that as well. For instance, I'll give you another example. We learn right in the beginning of creation that the world was created with 10 utterances. Later on, when the Torah was given, we learn that the Torah was given with also 10 utterances. Now, what's the connection between these two things? So, the 10 utterances, or Asara Mamoris, through which the world was created, and the 10 utterances with which the Torah was given, the Aseres HaDibros, actually have a parallel. And the Zohar goes on to explain what the parallel is between...
A parallel between the creation of the world with 10 utterances and the 10 commandments.
Right, exactly. And he goes on to say that the world was created, each one of the 10 utterances was for the sake of the 10 commandments. And he goes on, the Zohar goes on to link them up and show exactly how they work. Another example, as we know, the Torah was given on 2 tablets of stone. The 5 commandments on each stone. The first 5 are between man and God, and the second 5 between man and man. The Zohar then goes on to link up the two and show how the laws between man and man cannot have any sense unless you link them directly to the laws between man and God, the communication between man and God. So therefore, the authority for the law between man and man rests on the authority of the law between man and God. So this is the kind of thing that the Zohar does. That's why the Zohar is Kabbalah. The word Kabbalah itself is, besides meaning received tradition, also means Hakbalah. Hakbalah means to make parallels between things. In order to make a parallel between two apparently very, very disparate things, you have to get right to the very depth of the idea and find out where, in fact, they both stem from. As in other words, there's a common node, a common idea from which these two things spring, and that's why they're really connected. So the function of Kabbalah is really, of theoretical Kabbalah, is to find a connection between these two things. The function of practical Kabbalah is to actually experience that connection between these two things.
How interesting. Different sects of Hasidut, of Hasidic Jews, have different teachings. Something that I've learned many a times over the years is the Kedushas Levi, Rabbi Levi Bardichev, and he speaks of the different spiritual realms of the world and the universe and levels and so on. And then there's the Alter Rebbe all the way down to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rebbe Menachem Schneerson of blessed memory, who talk about so many spiritual things. Are these things that the Hasidic scholars taught and were passed down from generation to generation with their followers and their leaders from following generations? Are they based on Kabbalah?
Yeah, I didn't actually finish my previous explanation.
Okay.
Yeah, right. There was the first level of Kabbalah, the first era of Kabbalah, which ends with Rabbi Moshe Cordovero, is what is called, the focus is on developmental ideas. In other words, the development of the world, the development of the soul, the development of the human being, developmental structures. That's basically the idea. The next stage is begins with the Arizal, Rabbi Yitzhak Luria, who was the famous 15th century sage who's buried in Safed in Sfas, not very far from Meron.
I've been to his grave.
Right. And he began a completely new dimension. He opened up a new dimension. It's there implicit in the Zohar, but it wasn't revealed before. So he revealed this new dimension within the teachings of the Zohar, which deal with an aspect of Kabbalah which is called Partzufim. There's many other aspects to it, but the main aspect perhaps is Partzufim. A Partzuf means a visage or a face. So what does it talk about? It talks about the interaction of things. Instead of just the development of things, it talks about now how things begin to interact together, how different levels interact. In other words, there's many levels of reality which Kabbalah describes. How does one level impinge upon the other? How does a higher level impinge upon the lower level? And what's the effect of things done on the lower level upon the higher level? That's what he begins to speak about. That's the second stage, the second era of Kabbalah. The third era of Kabbalah begins with the Baal Shem Tov. And the Baal Shem Tov now...
Who is the father of Hasidic...
Father of Hasidic movement in the 1600s, late 1600s. So he now begins to explain how this is all connected to the essence of God. And you will find in his Kabbalistic writings, actually he didn't write very much himself, it's mostly his students that wrote things down, where Kabbalah, even of the Arizal, ends and says we don't have permission to talk beyond this point, that's where he begins, right? And he goes way beyond that point and talks about much higher levels of manifestation and transcendence of godliness and so on and so forth.
It's hard to put in a half-hour TV show so much about Kabbalah. I want to talk about these books that you've translated. These are Rabbi Shalom Dovber Schneerson of Lubavitch discourses on the holiday of Rosh Hashanah, and this is a second discourse, Forces in Creation, and also the rabbi's works, and you've translated them to English. How does one choose where in ancient literature, in literature that's passed down and been learned in Lashon HaKodesh, as we call it, learned in Hebrew, learned in Yiddish, and so on, where does one choose which discourses and teachings to translate, and why those would be important to be translated for people who aren't able to learn from the original text?
Always in choosing these things, I think it's important, and this is the principle that I base my translations and teachings on. Those teachings which have practical significance can be understood by the human intellect with a little bit of explanation, and which are going to make the world around us a better place. In other words, to grab, as the expression is used, to grab the ankles of the angels is not the purpose of Kabbalah. The purpose of Kabbalah really is to, bring goodness, more goodness into the world, and to improve a person's life in terms of how he deals with the challenges that each one of us face, and how simply to make life better, to make the world better, and to help other people. That's basically, and so those are the ones that I choose to translate.
Very nice. As time is running down now, tell me about the museum. Where's the museum going to be? What is it about, and what is the purpose of it?
The museum is in Sfat, in Safed, which is in the northern Galilee, the famous city of Kabbalah. And because it's really called the city of Kabbalah, with so many Kabbalists buried there and who taught and lived there, it was decided that a museum would be set up. I'm one of the consultants for the museum. It's in the process now of being designed. And this will be a museum where a person can go in and get a fairly good idea of what Kabbalah talks about and get some kind of understanding of, so to speak, the Kabbalistic universe. So that we're expecting thousands and thousands of visitors a year. As you probably know, Miron, which is not very far away from there, have on Lag BaOmer, as you mentioned, about 250, 300,000 people every time. Many, many, many of those people are going to come through the museum. And Sfat itself right now has approximately 50 to 100,000 visitors every year, depending on the year. But between 50 and 100,000 visitors, and many people have asked, why isn't there a museum that commemorates the great teachings, and not only commemorates them, but continues to make them lived, bring them into reality for us, so that we can understand, we can get sort of a hands-on understanding of what's going on.
Very nice, very nice. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming and being on the show with me. You are an amazing person, and certainly what you're doing is from your heart, because I know that your teachings of Kabbalah are something that are very dear to you, and you're doing it l'shem shamayim, for very holy purposes. And I wish you much hatzlacha, much success.
Thank you very
Rabbi
much.
Moshe Miller, in your works, in your teachings, and certainly the basis of it all is the Zohar, and your book right here, selections translated and annotated by Moshe Miller. Zohar is one book that I think is a great starter for people if they have no inkling to what Kabbalah and the origins of it are. And I wish you much success with all you do. I want to thank all of you, our viewers, for being with us. Remember, you can check out our website at www.tvrabbi.com and find out more about our guests and about Rabbi Moshe Miller. You can also email me, info@tvrabbi.com, if you have any questions, and I'll be happy to pass them on to Rabbi Miller, and I'm sure he'll get back to you. And remember also that we're on every week at this time. I once again want to thank Rabbi Moshe Miller for coming and being here with us. I want to thank all of you and hope to see you next time right here on Taped with Rabbi Doug. Shalom.
Mishpatim terum atzav, kisisa.